Back again with episode 4 of 10 Questions with. Enjoy.
My name is Alyssa. I am from Hamilton, Ontario, one of the greatest music cities in the world, and I play guitar and I sing, and I'm currently playing an Astral witch. I got into punk music not necessarily by choice. My parents were both kind of metalheads, punk rockers, and I was very, very lucky to have Hamilton's own Frankie Venom at the dinner table every single Sunday, pretty much. And Teenage Head was such a huge inspiration to me, definitely like seeing them on, festival routes, the circuits and that kind of stuff. Just, I never got to see them in bars, obviously, with the original lineup. I was way too young. But I did get to see Frankie perform a few times, outdoor festivals, that kind of thing. But I think the best part of it was when, we would jam. He'd come over, we'd play guitar. He actually taught me my very, very first couple songs on guitar. And I remember he was playing and he was singing, and it was something on my mind. And there was another kid over, like a neighbor kid, and he's like, "Oh yeah, we'll teach the kid a couple chords." And I'm like, "I want to play. He goes, No. And I'm like, I want to play guitar. So he's like, okay. And the other kid's having a really hard time. He hands me the guitar and I'm like, okay, like this. And he goes, yes! And I'm like, perfect, this is going to be my thing. And I knew when I was 9 years old, I was like, I'm going to be a guitarist. That's going to be my thing for life. So getting into Teenage Head, obviously got into the Forgotten Rebels, listening to all those bands like Canadian 70s punk bands, things like that. I got into obviously Ramones and classic bands like that. And then I kind of moved a little bit more towards the grunge scene. The 90s were very important to me. Lots of my favorite bands, definitely punk influence, like bands like Mudhoney and things like that. The Fluid, a lot of sub pop bands. But that's definitely where I got my start, was sitting around the kitchen table with a couple acoustic guitars, playing some Teenage Head and Ramones, and just learning all about the music scene and all the cool parts of it. Okay, some of my main influences growing up definitely came from, again, I was really into the whole 90s scene, that grunge thing, trying to find my way and being like, I missed the whole Seattle scene by a decade, and I can't really catch up, but I can listen to all this stuff. So musically, very inspired by L7, Bikini Kill, The Gits, 7 Year Bitch. There's like a ton of amazing all women, all female bands, or different members identified as female, and I love that. I love that about the scene, that I could actually look up to somebody and kind of see like, okay, there's a woman in that band, so could I do that too? All right, that's pretty cool. And then local bands, Pantychrist. Oh my God, I was a huge Pantychrist fan. I used to go and see them all the time, the Underground, Corktown, in Hamilton. And eventually I started a band called Racula with Patty. Patty and I actually had another band before that called BDSM Bake Sale. And we used to give out porn and cookies at the shows, which was hilarious. Always a great turnout. And then we started Racula, and Patty is definitely one of my biggest personal influences. She taught me a lot about the music scene. She taught me a lot about feminism. She taught me a lot about many, many things. She's actually the reason why I graduated high school. So I'm very, very grateful to her for all of that. Other influences musically, it's really, really hard being a woman and trying to find, in the mass media, somebody to look up to. So there was a lot of male, fronted bands, and I was like, well, I can sing like that. I'm going to try to sing like that. So I would try my hardest to do like a Phil Anselmo scream, or I would try to sing like a range that, Mike Patton had or something like that. But the thing that always kind of grabbed me musically was going back to punk. So I just continued with punk bands, and that was kind of my thing. All right, very first show I ever attended, in utero. That's right, my mom was pregnant with me. She went to go see Aerosmith, and there was some other hair metal bands playing, and I remember her telling me the story as I got older, and she's like, yeah, you were like kicking along to the beat to Aerosmith. And I told Jen, the drummer for Astral, this story. She goes, no frickin' way, that was my first show ever. And I couldn't believe that. I said, okay, so that was your first show ever, and I was just a fetus, and we were there at the same time? That's pretty amazing. So that was, I guess, kind of my first show ever. But my first real show, my stepdad, Mike, he was a head chief rigger at Cops Coliseum for years, so I got in to see hundreds of bands. I've seen hundreds of bands in my life, and I'm very grateful for that. I worked IATSE for years as well. And I got to work a lot of really cool shows and meet a lot of cool musicians as well. But I remember I was really excited. I was probably like, I don't know, 8. And he's like, oh, Weird Al's playing tonight. Do you want to go? And I was like, yeah, like Weird Al's cool, right? So he took me to the show. I watched the show. It was really, really cool. It was at Hamilton Place. And I met Weird Al backstage. And I remember I got his autograph and all this stuff, and I went to like hand him a pen, and it was shaking so bad, and he's like laughing at me, and I'm like, oh my god, this is brutal. But it was an amazing kind of first experience for a show, because I just felt so kind of welcomed, and he was really friendly, so that was really nice. First like punk show I ever saw, one of my favorite memories actually. So it was probably like 14, 15, and I believe it was Leftover Crack, and maybe Choking Victim may have been playing as well, but it was at the 360 in Toronto, which is a venue that has long ceased to exist now, but they weren't selling advance tickets, and you had to go line up in the heat all day long. So we had all gotten together and done our thing and waited in line all day long, and we finally got in there, got in the pit, and somebody couldn't get across the border, one of the guys, but it was one of the best shows ever, and just moshing around, having a great time, getting punched in the face, and just having a total blast. That was a good one. Another good one, actually, seeing the Forgotten Rebels and having Mickey DeSatis pull me up on stage and sing to me, which, I love Mickey forever. Definitely every time I see the Forgotten Rebels, it makes my heart just beam, so definitely something that makes me pretty happy. All right, my most favorite / memorable shows. Okay, I got a couple. Every single show at the Corktown, including when bands like Pantychrist would play, back in the day when Corktown was a lot more skeezy than it is now. It's a lot nicer. There used to be raw sewage that would flow across the floor, and that was definitely one of the most memorable things. Like, oh my god! And people would be moshing, and you'd have to there used to be like these pipes that would run across, and people would be grabbing onto them in the pit, trying to keep off the floor is lava, so to say, but it was pretty disgusting. So that is definitely one of my most memorable shows. Now, favorite shows, it's so hard. Like when you've seen so many bands, there's little tiny pieces of everything that kind of, you're like, okay, that was cool. Like the sound was amazing that night, or the stage show was phenomenal, or I had a really great experience. I saw Brothers of the Sonic Cloth with Yob. Yob was headlining, and Brothers of the Sonic Cloth is actually made up of a couple of different Seattle guys. And the singer is Tad Doyle from the band Tad. And I had actually seen him out front, and I went up and I was like, hey, it's so nice to meet you. He goes, I know you, you're from Astral. I was like, oh my god, this is amazing. I was just totally like, he knew my band, and Astral was just really, really, really just starting, and infant kind of baby years, and it was pretty humbling to have that experience. So that was, and the fact that the show was amazing, the bass and everything. Doom is just so heavy, you can feel it in your soul, right? So it was such an amazing show. Another one, this is definitely like big arena shows. Motley Crue played at Cops Coliseum, and I can't remember, it was Circus Tour, I think, and they had like fire eaters and little people climbing around, and there were strippers, and Tommy Lee got up in the air and he went on this track and played drums upside down, and I thought it was the most amazing thing of all time, and I was like, this is pretty cool, once in a lifetime thing. And at the end of the show, he actually tossed me a bottle of Jägermeister and asked me to see my boobs, and I said, absolutely not. So my first band ever, I was probably like 13 years old, and it was me and two other guys. We were like grade 7, grade 8, and we'd get together and we would jam. We tried to write originals, but it was mostly whatever was popular at the time, which was like System of a Down and Korn and bands like that. So we did that. It was what it was, you know. It gave me a chance to play with other musicians, which was nice. And then my first real gigging band was BDSM Bake Sale, and that had Luke Minock on bass and Patty Wax on drums. We ended up putting out an EP, which was recorded at the Jam House with Tony Furtado and Russ Wilson from Drunk House. Very cool guys. Love those guys forever. They're amazing. So we recorded there, we played some shows there, had a blast. Like I said, we gave out porn and cookies. Who could not love a band like that? We were having a blast doing it. Eventually, BDSM Bake Sale disbanded, and thus Racula was born. So that was originally comprised of myself, Molly, Lisa, and Patty on drums. Racula actually lasted for quite a long time, for about 5 to 6 years, I think. We put out an EP, and then I think we did the full-length album, and then we did a 7-inch. We played a ton of shows. We had a lot of fun. We played Montreal, I remember, which was a really weird experience because we showed up to the gig. Greg Dickinson had actually driven us, and he was kind of being like our roadie slash like tour manager for the whole kind of thing. Great guy. So we show up, I have my guitar on my back, and I have my amp, and the girls are behind me loading up the gear. I go up to the venue, I knock on the door, and the guy looks at me and goes, and I'm like, let me in! And he won't let me in. And there's snow outside and everything. I put my amp down, and I'm like, let me in. He goes, no, who are you? And I'm like, we're the band playing tonight. He goes, no, girls don't play instruments. Well, didn't Patty and myself and the other woman just get livid? We were so mad about that. We ended up playing the show anyway, but I remember being very pissed off the whole night and thinking that the whole venue must have been run by a bunch of chauvinist jerks. But that was a fun story too. Racula eventually ended up disbanding as well. Did a couple of other things over the years, such as the Jolly Cuts with Molly and Jen, and Carrie was playing drums at the time. We didn't really do too much, no demos or anything like that, a couple of gigs. I've done a couple of odds and sods playing with different bands. They're playing drums a couple of times, playing bass. Not a big fan of playing bass, but hey, that's okay. We gotta do what we gotta do. Playing guitar is definitely my main thing, and I love to scream into a microphone, hence punk rock forever. And eventually Astral, which came about, and that was originally comprised of myself and the other Alyssa. So very cool woman. She plays in a band called Within Nostalgia up in North Bay, which is kind of like a blackened death metal, black metal kind of project. Very neat. And Astral, which since then has become myself, Jen on drums, and John on bass. I do vocals and guitar. John does vocals and bass, and Jen does drums and some backing vocals. There was a time where Jen and I were first starting out, and we were looking for a bass player. We had gotten a lot of hits, and a lot of people were messaging us, I want to play bass, like, let us join the band, let me join the band, whatever. And everybody had basically said in the comments, so do I have to have a vagina to be in this band? do I have to be a girl to be in this band? And the only person who didn't say anything about that and just said, look at my sick guitar pedals, was John. And I said, you're in the band. You're the only one who's not a jerk. So Astral, which has been going strong for over 5 years now. We've put out an EP, we've put out a vinyl, we have a CD, we have a 7-inch that has an awesome cover done by a local artist, like the physical covers done by a local artist in Toronto. I can't remember her name off the top of my head. And then the backing track on it is a cover song of a band called Julian's Treatment. And yeah, that one's doing pretty well. And other than that, Odds It's Odds and Astral Witch, that is what I'm up to these days. Being a female musician, somebody who identifies as female in the music scene, is really strange at times. We definitely experience some things that the bulk of male musicians don't experience, such as being billed with other bands on a bill that are a completely different genre, and it not being like a battle of bands or something like that, because of course bands are going to be lumped together if you're punk, if you're metal, if you're death metal, whatever, right? If you're something that's not, you know, acoustic, then you're going to be lumped together for a battle of bands or some kind of showcase. However, if you are a woman, you are going to get lumped on a bill with other female musicians, other female fronted bands and things like that. So I've played in doom metal bands and punk bands, and I've been paired on bills with acoustic 2-piece female sets, country bands, pop bands, electronic bands, and different kinds of things, just because of the fact that I'm a woman. I don't personally, like, and I can't speak on behalf of all women, never. I never would want to do that. Each and every single one of us and every single person on this planet has their own belief and respect in the world, and they deserve their respect, right? But it definitely sucks to be lumped on the bill with different genres, and it can be helpful at times to be a woman and to be with different bands that have different genres, just for the fact that you may get a new fan base or something like that. But for the most part, that does really piss me off. So another thing is we get a lot, she's really good for a girl. How many times a guy's come to the stage and I'm doing like a solo, a lead, something like that, and they're like, oh my god, she's almost as good as every guy I know. And I'm like, oh, that's so not what this is about. And I just want to kick him. Something like that, right? So there are a couple different things. So yes, the scene has definitely progressed. I'm seeing a ton more women, especially in punk and metal and harder different types of genres like that. We need more women. This is something that's very, very important in different aspects and everything. And I'm not going to go on a huge soapbox like I normally would. But the music industry definitely needs more women, whether it's doing actual, you know, being in the performance part of it, or doing sound engineers or stage rigging, anything like that. It's very crucial and important to have to see some kind of balance between genders. Very important, and we have definitely made some headway in the grand scheme of things, but there's still a lot more work to do. All right, one of the best things about being in a band is the fact that you actually get to perform music that you write for other people. And one of the best feelings in the world is having somebody sing your lyrics back at you while you're on stage. That is like, oh, just amazing. Just like right in the feels, right in your heart, just kind of connects, and it makes that feel really, really special. And I think going through the lyric kind of thing too, everybody perceives things differently. So a song that you could have written about one thing, somebody's going to take in a different way. But either way, you get to make that connection with somebody, however they perceive it, which is pretty amazing. So building connections with people who listen to your music is definitely one of the best things. Another thing is to create music with other people too, which is pretty wild. You could come to the table with somebody and have a whole idea for a song, and then all of a sudden they, you know, put their part into it, and then it sounds like a completely different song. Most of the time, that's pretty good. Some of the time, not so good. The song isn't exactly your baby anymore, but that's okay. Those are definitely some of the best things about being able to perform music, and definitely being able to get out those raw emotions, those feelings that maybe you can't get out with other things, and having an outlet. And as a social worker, I'm all about self-care, so whether it's being able to sit behind a drum kit and beat the crap out of it or write down how you feel, it's always good to do. Some of the worst things, oh God, some of the worst things. What do I hate most? Well, hate's a really strong word, but the money sucks being a musician. Even like nowadays, if you were to make it big, you're still in debt to record companies and labels forever. So it's not like you'd ever make money doing your things. So we're perpetually broke artists doing what we love for the hell of it. So it does kind of suck that, yeah, it doesn't pay, but hey, that's okay. I think if I was to be a musician full time and somebody wanted me to put out a very specific thing all the time, it would suck all of the fun out of it. Another thing that I hate, or that maybe sucks the most about being a musician, being a female musician, gonna bring it up again, definitely a frustrating thing, just because you have to prove yourself a little bit harder, a little bit more than anybody else. Any, like men specifically, obviously, but when you're a woman, you have to be the best of the best to even get on the bottom tier. So it does make it really challenging. If you're not consistently trying to improve yourself, then you're not gonna be recognized. Other than that, yeah, things that kind of suck about being a musician, maybe if a band breaks up and you miss your people, because a band becomes your family, and it's so special to have a connection like that because they're like your best friends, but you also work with them, and you get to create a beautiful baby, which is music. Useless talent, that's a really, really hard one. I thought about this for a while, and I do have one that I can think of. And this is a really interesting one okay, so I'm going to backtrack a little bit. There was an event at the Corktown that me and my ex actually put on, and it was a Halloween show. So we had the Creep Show play, we had psychics, we had a bunch of Halloween stuff going on. I think maybe Steve Santini had performed. It might have been a different show, but this psychic was there, and I had never had a reading before. And I do find myself, I have a little bit of clairvoyancy, but I was like, okay, I'm gonna go to a psychic and see what she says. And I sit down at the table, she's going through tarot cards, and then she's just kind of focusing for a moment. She goes, "There's a man behind you." And I said, "Where is he?" Okay. And she says, "He's got dark hair, and he's wearing a leather jacket." And I'm like, okay, that could be a million people, right? He goes, he's sitting there, and he's just kind of smug, and he's kind of tugging on his jacket, and he's clean shaven, and she's describing this person. And she's like, "Okay, he looks like a rocker." And all of a sudden he started doing this, I guess, apparently. So what she was trying to show me is that when I was learning how to play guitar and Frankie Venom from Teenage Head was teaching me, I had a hard time holding the guitar for the fact that I am double jointed in my thumb. And I had a lot of difficulty holding the neck and training my hand to work that way. So I had this psychic come forward, and this was after Frankie passed, and he had made this connection with me via showing me that he remembered that I was double jointed in my thumb. So that is my useless talent. I'm a total foodie. I love to cook. I'm cooking every single day. I do a lot of meal prep. I love trying out different types of food. I am privileged enough to, I spent a couple years living with my stepmother, who is Mexican, doesn't speak a word of English, actually speaks some Spanish, and she taught me some wonderful Mexican cooking tips. So I love Mexican food. That is definitely my favorite food in the entire world. Mesa on James Street North, the best, most auténtica mexicana, comí. Beautiful, love it. Tacos, quesadillas, anything. Like, I love any kind of Mexican food, and that is definitely my jam. Yeah, that's it. My favorite food, definitely Mexican.